Hey, this is Sean Folliard, former NIU linebacker, current NFL Draft prospect, and you are listening to On the Fin Side.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. It ain't the left
Thank you,
side
Solo D.
or
Welcome
the
to
right
another
side.
episode of On the Fin Side, here with Brian Catanzaro and Chris Kouffman, CK Parrott, as we continue to digest the Miami Dolphins draft board. And today, the linebacker position seems to be a big need for the Dolphins. They re-signed and extended Kiko Alonso in the offseason, kept Koamisi, and signed Lawrence Timmons to a 2-year, $12 million deal. But that doesn't mean the Dolphins cannot continue to add additional players as they go through the NFL draft. The big question on everybody's mind, CK, Reuben Foster seems to be one of those players projected all over the board. I've seen him projected as high as fourth to the Jaguars and falling down into the teens that could put the Dolphins in sniffing range for a Reuben Foster. He had that incident at the NFL Draft Combine where he was sent home after an argument with a health member from the draft. But where do you see him falling on draft day? Somewhere between, he really could go anywhere in the first round.
Yeah, I think that there's a strong, I hesitate to use the word strong, but there's definitely a possibility that he could sink like a stone on draft day, because you have to keep in mind there are a couple of things going against him. Now, the talent and the things that we see on the field, those are all the things that are going in his favor, obviously. We know that he's a good player, but if you look at, it's not just the incident at the Combine. He has other incidents and other questions that teams are bringing up about who he hangs out with and what role they're going to play in his life when he goes to the NFL. He had an incident at Alabama where he was not involved with, but at a nightclub when a triple homicide occurred, and one of the people that were killed was, I believe, a cousin of his, and he didn't come forward to the police and say that he was there or give any witness testimony. In fact, they found out kind of third hand way after the fact that he was there, and he tried to say that he wasn't involved, he knew nothing, he wasn't any part of any group there. But then in interviews later, he's talking about how the lesson he learned from it is not to really denigrate somebody who might be having a bad day. Don't trash them or anything like that, because you never know. And all these details that he's giving is like, well, now it sounds like you kind of did see what was going on there. So it just lends credence to the idea that he might have sort of a bad crowd traveling around with him. And then you add on top of that the rumors. I don't know if it's even rumor at this point. It seems like it's fairly well confirmed that he has sort of a learning disability. He has trouble with things on the whiteboard and the playbook. He's more of a kinesthetic learner. And then look at, from a size standpoint, we're talking about a guy that's 6'0" and 229. We're not talking about a 6'3", 240-pound guy. These things just stack up. And then when you toss on top of it this shoulder injury he had and rumors that he just went to the Combine recheck and it's still injured and he might need another surgery, it's just really piling up. And I don't know if his draft stock can take it.
Yeah, so who would you say is more likely to fall to the Dolphins at 22? Reuben Foster or his college teammate Jonathan Allen? Both have had some injury problems, and some have criticism with their lack of versatility, where you're not talking about somebody who's a pure edge rusher, where it seems to be that's where the money really comes from as far as these defensive players.
I think the more likely to fall to be available at 22 overall would be Reuben Foster. When I'm looking at the medical issues that they're talking about, I have had it impressed upon me how important either one of their medical issues could be, but still Reuben sounds a little bit more serious than what I know of Jonathan Allen, so I think that he's probably the more likely to be available.
Looking at the rest of the linebackers, as we start getting down to the Dolphins pick, players that we can somewhat expect to be there, I keep hearing linebacker Jared Davis from Florida, who had some eye-popping numbers at his pro day, 4.59, 38.5 vertical leap, and Zach Cunningham, the linebacker from Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I think that if you're going with any of the three SEC linebackers between Foster and Cunningham and Jarrad Davis, then you're going to get a great product on the field. That much was clear on tape. I thought I've been looking at these guys, and I've been looking at Foster and Cunningham and Davis, who initially wasn't being considered up with those guys, but I did. I thought it was the three SEC linebackers were sort of the group, the unit for me the whole time. And because the field product looks a lot of the same quality for all three, you kind of have to go with, well, what else is there to them as a prospect? And that's where you start looking at the off-field stuff. And Jarrad Davis, what I've heard anyway, is very much a Jarvis Landry type heartbeat of the defense player that other players feed off of. So he has those things going for him. I think that when you look at him, and this is where I got confused with the way that some people were positioning Jarrad Davis before the combine, before the pro day, before he tested well. They were trying to say that he was kind of a good football player that isn't going to run well or test well or jump well or any of these things. I've always seen him as more of an athlete that's still learning to play the position. He does look very explosive to me on tape. He looks like he can run. I mean, I've seen him run up the seam and down the middle of the field with athletic tight ends that I know run really fast. And so I've seen him play fast. I've seen him play athletic. And the guy is so aggressive and so physically explosive. Sometimes I've made the joke. I think that he's on horse testosterone injections or something like that. He really is a very aggressive, physically explosive player. Knows how to get off blocks and can be aggressive that way. And I think he's got some instincts in the passing game, but clearly very unrefined right now. And he's still working on it. This was only his second year starting, and I think that his playing time has been truncated a little bit with some injuries. So you're not getting a polished linebacker in him, but you are getting a pretty good one. Same with Zach Cunningham, same with Reuben Foster, although you do have to pay attention to those kind of ancillary issues with him.
Looking down the board, two players that are projected right around the Dolphins spot, not sure if they're the best fit, that we talked about a few weeks ago are T.J. Watt and Hassan Reddick.
That's right. I think T.J. Watt can be a very special player. It's just a matter of what system he goes into and how they want to use him. It's possible that down the line, you could even see him playing some inside linebacker and standing out that way. He has what he really has that makes him unique, in my opinion, is first off, he is explosive and has explosive, twitchy movements. He's not fast, but he is explosive, and the way that he reacts to the football and the way that he sees and anticipates the football is unique. I think that it's a lot like his brother, actually, J.J. Watt, and how J.J. has been a legend at being able to knock down passes. I think T.J. Watt has that in him. But he's also, because he's a little bit more maneuverable, he's also able to translate that probably into coverage a little bit more. But he's a very brutal and raw, monster as a pass rusher. But he can play a real linebacker position, so I would look at him if I were Miami, especially as Miami has kind of signaled recently when they were talking about Kouffman that they had some looks that they were going to try to go with last year with Kouffman, who could play like a 3-4 outside linebacker. And then they lost Misi for the year, and they lost the ability to do that altogether because they had no other player that could do it. So they could think about getting somebody like a T.J. Watt that could fill some of those ideas or those packages that they had in mind. Now you mentioned Hassan Reddick, and this is a player that reminds me of like those running backer types that you've seen in some of the past drafts. I think that he's a guy. He's not a pass rusher like some of the other pass rushers that you see out there. He's a little small for that, and I think because he's a little small for that, he might be a little too easily blocked. I think he's a real linebacker. I think he's a a Will in some schemes. In Miami's scheme, where he's going to play stacked or off the line a little bit more, he might be a Sam, and you're going to ask that guy to really just run around and use his speed and shut down the edge and be a playmaker and also be a blitzer. And that's where he fits in Miami. He's very attractive in doing that. I don't know if it's going to be at number 22 or not. Actually, to be quite honest, I'm not sure that the Dolphins are going to be in for a linebacker at 22 overall, period, just because they have so many needs. I think that their mindset right now is that they're going to get a non-rotational starter, and whereas a linebacker at this point, where they already have Lawrence Timmons and they already have Kiko Alonso, those are going to be the more of the full-time players. The next guy that they get at linebacker is going to have to battle Koomisi for playing time, and also try and at best have Go Alonso or Lawrence Timmons kind of go to the bench a few more times than they naturally would, so that you can make enough snaps for all of them. I don't know if the Dolphins are going to be into that game at 22 overall. I think they're going to be looking at the position, but they might not be targeting it high enough.
So after the first round, you start talking about players like Raekwon McMillan from Ohio State, Tyus Bowser from Houston, Alex Anzalone from Florida, and Duke Riley from LSU, a few names that have been mentioned. Where do you see the value at linebacker after the first round if the Dolphins go in that direction?
Well, one guy, Raekwon McMillan, that you talked about, and I'm not saying that the Dolphins should necessarily pick him or not pick him, but when I'm looking at all these guys side by side, I thought that Jared Davis's game, as I mentioned, was a little immature. I think that Raekwon McMillan's game is more immature. I think that every time I'm looking at him, just everything he's doing just strikes me as very young. That doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing, because these are developing players, and Raekwon McMillan in particular is actually a young player and not experienced enough. He will get better. But when I look at, say, let's go to the other end of the spectrum, and I look at Anthony Walker Jr. of Northwestern, this is an old salt. This guy, recognizing his diagnostic abilities and anticipation of what the offense is doing, is the best that I've seen in the class. It's not that he can at times look like a very athletic player because of those anticipation abilities and because he's very aggressive and can pull a trigger. But really what you see is, and you have to kind of put these guys up next to each other to see it, but the little things, the little cues that he gives you, that he's recognizing and anticipating exactly what the offense is going to do on every play. If you add him to your defense, then you're adding a lot of IQ. And that you can't really understate what that can mean to your defense. And all that said, I mean, it's not like this guy is slow. He's solidly in the 4.6s as far as his speed is concerned. He's 6'1" 238 pounds, 240 pounds. He reminds me. I think he's going to have a career that's very similar to Stephen Tulloch, who coincidentally just retired today. I think he had a nice 10-year career, and I think that Anthony Walker Jr. could have a career like that. One guy, though, that probably belongs in this conversation this high, but who doesn't get a lot of talk, is Samson Ebukam of Eastern Washington. I only got a look at him fairly recently, but I was absolutely floored with the way that he looks. He had a game against Washington State that was one of the single best games that I've seen of any position this year. And it was in space he looked like Levante David, and in pass rush he looked like Cameron Wake. It was ridiculous. So I think that he's a guy that you keep an eye on. Athletically, he tests off the charts. He was some people like those spark measures. I think he might have been the second highest spark measure of anybody in the draft this year. But you see that all over the tape. He's built well. You can see his structure, his body is built exactly right for the position. His background checks out. You look at the sports that he was involved in high school. And his background and what he cares about and his family, and trying to give back to his family and provide for them. Everything just really checks out with him, and I think that he's a player that could go a lot higher. He's certainly a guy that I would target if I were the Dolphins. I would actually compare him a lot to a Hassan Reddick, except this guy has pass rush that I think could actually translate a little better than Reddick. So he's one guy to keep an eye on that way. And then there are some other guys. You mentioned a few, but Vince Beagle of Wisconsin Wisconsin in particular is a guy that I don't think gets enough credit for what he is and what he can do. And I would keep an eye. He's a big 6'3", 245-pound type, just like Alex Anzalone actually. And he might be a guy that can play a Sam position and run with tight ends like he did in the Senior Bowl. He ran with Evan Engram up the seam, had no trouble. Broke up the pass. So, he's a guy, he's very crafty. He reminds me of Kyle Van Noy, and not the Kyle Van Noy that kind of busted out of Detroit, but the Kyle Van Noy who came to New England and suddenly within a few games of even being there, he's like a starter on their defense and contributing winning snaps. So, that's kind of how I see those guys in the middle area.
I look at the linebacker unit and see this is a group that shows that the NFL is getting a lot faster. I mean, you look at some of the players you mentioned, Raekwon McMillan, Tyus Bowser, Anthony Walker. We're talking about players who are 240 pounds, run a 4.65 in the 40, and have some good tape on them too. So it'll be definitely interesting to see. CK, does anybody else stick out at you at the linebacker position for the Dolphins? They have 3 fifth-round picks and 2 seventh-round picks.
Well, I think when you get down a little bit, some guys that I haven't really mentioned are Richie Brown of Mississippi State and Joseph Jones of Northwestern. Again, going back to those Northwestern players, but they are in my defense, they are generally a well-coached defense, and their coaching staff is very well respected by NFL people. But looking at Richie Brown, I saw him up close and personal at Shrine practices, and he stood out immediately for how well he moved. Watching him go through the drills, it was practically as if he were the one teaching the drills to the other players. He was giving everybody else pointers and just running through them at a speed and with coordination that nobody else seemed to have. And then you saw that and the practice field kind of translate to the practice snaps and the way that he can move. He looked to me, he had the look of a coverage linebacker. And when I went ahead and watched him, because I had never seen him before on Mississippi State tape, and I went ahead and looked at him, and I saw that, he did have 100 tackles at Mississippi State, and he had the look of a coverage linebacker there. He was very accomplished. The thing that he doesn't do too well is navigate through traffic and get to the ball, and he's going to have to work on that. But in the NFL nowadays, you're not building from they call it a 2-down linebacker when you're a run stopping linebacker, but it's not 2 downs in the NFL anymore. It's more like 1 down. You can't be that
right
anymore. You're building from the back forward now. You're building from being a good coverage guy to working your way into Kiko Alonso is a great example, to working your way into being able to stop the run. And I see Richie Brown within that context being a guy that you can trust in nickel and be a good coverage player, and then kind of work his way and get better and better, possibly against the run, get smarter. He went out, and I know that he had a pro day and basically wowed a lot of scouts and showed a lot of what I had been talking about since Shrine practices in terms of his movement abilities. That's one guy, and Joseph Jones, the other guy that I would mention from Northwestern. Again, this is an adult person who can be a professional, knows how to balance his life and approach things like a pro, work like a pro. But what he showed on tape is that, well, first off, you have to go hunting for his snaps on tape because he doesn't have a ton of them. He was a Sam linebacker at Northwestern, which is already sort of a one strike against you as far as playing time because Sam linebackers are kind of a dying breed. But he also shared time with another guy, a younger guy who they have high hopes for somewhere down the road. So that was a second strike as far as his playing time goes. But when you see him out there, you saw a lot of explosiveness and you saw a lot of speed and running ability, and that came in the package or in the form of a guy who was an on-the-line Sam linebacker and could, be strong with tight ends. I mean, I saw him take on Troy Fumagalli, the tight end from Wisconsin, who's going to be a name to watch out for next year. Put him on skates a couple of times. He's just that strong. but then you watch his explosive movements. Even within the phone booth, he's being explosive, and then you get him on the run, and you say, wow, this guy's fast. So he's a Sam linebacker that runs like a Will linebacker. Now, he might not have played that often, but this is the kind of guy that populates NFL rosters when you get to the number 4 through number 6 spots on the depth chart. Everybody would talk about these college players that are sort of legendary but don't test very well. Those aren't the guys that populate the number 4 through number 7 spots on the depth chart at the NFL level. It's these guys like Joseph Jones who approach the NFL or approach the game with a professional attitude and might not have been huge playmakers in college, but they have the athleticism to play in special teams, and they have the athleticism to be trusted in there, and they have the strength, and that's a guy that I would look for too.
Chris Kouffman joining us. Follow him on Twitter, CK Parrott, and you can follow us on the Fin Side on Facebook, on Twitter, on Spreaker, on iTunes, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the Fin Side. Solo D, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the Fin side. Inside. It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the Fin side. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what Brian, Cat, and Paul